relished the voyage. The dingy tavern on Dalton 4 exuded the stench of low-grade, artificial liquor and hopelessness. Ethan slouched over his beverage in the murkiest corner, hood pulled far down over his face. 8 years as royal consort to the princesses of Arden had not lessened his preference for darkness instead of limelight. "You're sulking once again," Lincoln noted in his mind. Ethan traced the rim of his glass with one fingertip. "I'm pondering, same notion, different term." The bartender, a 6-armed hexapod sporting compound eyes that mirrored the dim glow in fractal patterns, slid another drink his way unprompted. Rumors had swiftly circulated about the enigmatic hooded customer who tipped with rare crystal fragments from Arden. "Admit it," Lincoln pressed, "you missed them." Ethan took a prolonged gulp, the shimmering liquid scorching its path down his throat. That diplomatic gathering dragged on 3 days longer than anticipated, and you were itching to escape all those dignitaries lauding the storied consort of the Arden royal household. Politicians. Ethan practically spat the term. "I'd rather square off against a regiment of chasm mercenaries." "Yet you portray the diplomat flawlessly when it's required," Lincoln teased, "almost as skillfully as you portray the father." The mention of his children gentled something in Ethan's eyes. "Sophie nearly liquefied the practice floor yesterday. Her abilities are advancing more quickly than yours did at her age. She's barely 7 yet already shaping energy fields that took me years to master. She possesses your focus and Morgan's intuition," Lincoln declared with unmistakable pride, "although your sons appear determined to battle my shadow illusions before they can even grip a genuine sword." Ethan's mouth twitched in mild amusement. "Therefore, what were you expecting? A bit of patience might." Lincoln's reflection was interrupted as the bar's entrance banged open. A blue-skinned woman with short white hair staggered in, her flight outfit ripped at the shoulder. Blood the shade of cobalt dripped from a gash on her forehead. Her chest rose and fell from exertion as she scanned the room, looking for a way out. 3 heavily armed individuals entered behind her. Freelance enforcers, if their mismatched gear and the notable yellow insignia of Chasm's Contract Security Division were any indication. "This is the end of the line, sweetheart," the foremost mercenary called out, his voice garbled through his helmet speaker. "The boss says you witnessed too much." The bar's patrons abruptly discovered their drinks riveting, avoiding involvement with the events unfolding on Dalton 4. Keeping out of trouble wasn't just polite, it kept you alive. "This seems familiar," Ethan murmured. "History tends to echo," Lincoln agreed. The blue-skinned woman pressed back against the bar, hands raised. "I'm an authorized operative of the Galactic Investigation Bureau. If any harm befalls me, it will trigger—" Yeah, the mercenary interrupted, activating an energy sword that hummed with lethal potential. "GIB credentials can be forged, and even if genuine, accidents happen in dives like this. No witnesses, no headache." Ethan released a weary breath, set aside his drink, and rose to his feet. "Not again," Lincoln groaned inwardly. "Hazard of frequenting seedy spots," Ethan retorted in silence as he advanced on the standoff. The blue-skinned stranger noticed him first, her electrifying green eyes widening a fraction when the cloaked figure stepped from the darkness. "Gentlemen," Ethan said, his voice deceptively mild, "maybe you could shift this conversation somewhere else." The 3 mercenaries turned. The ringleader let out a mocking chuckle. "Butt out, cloak. Not your concern." Ethan glanced at the trembling woman. "Are you okay?" She nodded, obviously unsure of his intervention. "I'd advise you to let her leave," Ethan continued, now directing his words to the mercenaries. "It'll spare everyone a lot of aggravation." The leader stepped nearer, raising his energy blade. "And I'm advising you to walk away before we chop you into fragments too minuscule to identify." Ethan sighed once more. "That's not going to occur." 3 armed experts against a lone unarmed bystander, the mercenary jeered. "Doesn't sound like favorable odds for you." "They are certainly lousy," Ethan conceded. "For you." The mercenary lunged. What took place next happened so swiftly that later, most bar patrons would argue about the precise sequence. The ebony sword that manifested in Ethan's grasp appeared to guide itself. carving a path through the air that converged flawlessly with the three enforcers. For an extended heartbeat, everything seemed frozen. Then all three collapsed in unison, their heads separating from their shoulders in an unerring motion. The blue-skinned woman stared at Ethan, mouth slightly agape. "How did you practice?" Ethan replied, sliding Lincoln back into its scabbard. The motion displaced his hood, unveiling his features to the entire bar. A united gasp rippled across the crowd as awareness dawned. One after another, they dropped to their knees. "It's him," someone whispered. "The Shadow Blade, consort of Arden." "I advised you to keep the hood on," Lincoln chided telepathically. "You're Ethan Marlowe," the blue-skinned woman breathed, awestruck. "The human who wedded the three princesses." Ethan winced at the abrupt scrutiny. "Just Ethan, please." "I'm Naomi," the woman said, straightening her stance and bowing formally. "Agent Naomi Clark of the Galactic Investigation Bureau. And it appears I'm indebted to you for my life." Ethan shrugged. "Years back, I might propose to you for saving your life, but 3 wives is my hard cap." Naomi emitted a startled laugh. "Then I'll simply give my thanks." Elsewhere, the bar's patrons remained on their knees, hesitant to stir without consent. Ethan indicated for them to rise, ill at ease with such reverence. "Where were you heading before these folks halted your trip?" he asked Naomi. "Arden, in fact," she responded. "I have a mission there." "Convenient," Lincoln remarked suspiciously in Ethan's mind. "What kind of mission?" Ethan pressed. Naomi hesitated. "Confidential, sorry, but it's nothing that would impact the royal family." Ethan watched her intently. Her green eyes met his without wavering, but her stance hinted that she wasn't divulging the entire story. "I'm also returning to Arden," he said at last. "I can provide transport if you want." "That would be a huge relief," Naomi said, genuine gratitude lacing her voice. "Walked right into that," Lincoln commented dryly. "Quiet," Ethan replied inwardly while motioning for Naomi to come along. "She's GIB. They rarely operate in this region for no reason. And attractive females never employ their charm to manipulate suspicious guys," Lincoln countered. "I'm married to 3 of the most gorgeous women in the galaxy," Ethan reminded the sword. "I'm not susceptible. If you believe that, you're more naive than I realized." Departing the bar, Ethan noticed Naomi watching him subtly. "Is something bothering you, Agent Clark?" "The stories revolve around you," she answered. "They claim you defeated an entire Chasm-Tech battalion alone to earn the princess's hands. Stories have a tendency to expand with each telling, and that your sword is sentient." Ethan's hand moved reflexively toward Lincoln's hilt. "Some weapons develop personality quirks. Is it accurate that the eldest princess foresees the future, the middle one manipulates fire, and the youngest can probe thoughts?" "You seem remarkably curious about my household for someone on a separate mission," Ethan remarked. Naomi flushed a darker blue. "Professional curiosity. The royal family of Arden is legendary, and so are the GIB's intelligence sources," Ethan responded. "You presumably have those answers already." They reached the royal transport ship, a streamlined, jet-black craft bearing Arden's emblem. Unlike typical diplomatic craft, this one had hidden weaponry equal to a moderate cruiser's firepower. "Impressive," Naomi noted, sliding a hand along the hull's seamless plating. "An offering from my wives following the twins' birth," Ethan explained while placing his palm on the entry scanner. "They suspected I'd occasionally require a getaway craft." The boarding ramp descended with a soft hydraulic hiss. As they boarded, Ethan sensed Lincoln's lasting distrust reverberating through their mental tie. "I'm unsure about her," the sword repeated. "You doubt everyone," Ethan replied. "I trust Ava and Lily and even Zoe, though she constantly tries to read your mind when I'm distracted. Their family, a different category. And your kids," Lincoln added, "especially Sophie. That child has all the makings of a genuine warrior." Lincoln's mental tone practically glowed with pride. In the 8 years since they'd formed a family, the ancient blade had unexpectedly embraced the role of doting grandfather. He forged shadow exercises for the children and recounted tales of old battles, while Ethan and the princesses handled governance. As Ethan initiated liftoff, an urgent signal blinked on the console. The worry faces of Sarah and Chloe appeared on screen. "Ethan." Sarah's voice was taut, her typical fiery assurance replaced by obvious dread. "You must come home instantly." "What happened?" Ethan demanded, instantly on edge. "It's Morgan," Chloe said, her normally sultry tone devoid of any humor. "She's been taken." Ethan froze, hands hovering over the controls. "Taken? How? When?" "Earlier today in the main marketplace," Sarah explained. "She was with Sophie." "Sophie." Ethan cut in, terror stabbing through him. Is she? "She's safe," Chloe reassured him quickly. "She escaped and made it back to the palace, but she's shaken, Ethan. She saw them assault her mother." Icy rage replaced fear. "Who took her?" The sisters exchanged a grim look. "We're unsure," Sarah admitted. But Sophie overheard one of them referencing a boss who needed Morgan alive. Before Ethan could respond, a new channel lit up on his personal communicator. The text-only note sent chills down his spine. "She's gorgeous when she's asleep, brother. You've possessed what should have been mine for far too long. Time to settle old debts, Damien." Ethan muttered in response to Sarah's frantic expression, though she couldn't read the text. "I recognize who has her," he said, voice deadly steady as he sped up the launch. "I'll be there in 6 hours. Seal the palace and double the security around the kids." Cutting the link, Ethan saw Naomi step into the cockpit. "Domestic issue?" "Nothing I can't manage," he said shortly, refusing to discuss family affairs with a stranger. "I have training in crisis mitigation," Naomi offered. "If there's any way." "The biggest help you can provide is keeping clear when we land on Arden," Ethan interrupted. "This is a private matter." As the ship exited the atmosphere, Lincoln stirred in his mind. After 23 years, the sword murmured, "Your brother finally makes his move." "He's been monitoring Morgan," Ethan responded. "He knew precisely when to strike. I'd warned you he'd be back. I know. You should have eliminated him when you could." Ethan's fingers clenched around the controls. "He was my brother. And now he possesses your wife," Lincoln responded acily. "What is your plan?" Starlight elongated into radiant lines as the ship hit hyperspace. In the void between worlds, Ethan's statement was concise and conclusive. "Anything it takes." Behind him, unseen, Naomi brushed a concealed communicator on her wrist. A small diode flickered, sending an encoded signal across unimaginable spans. "Package in transit. Phase 1 fulfilled." Several hours earlier on Arden, sunlight filtered through the kaleidoscopic market awnings as Morgan guided her daughter through the bustling city bazaar. Despite her status as consort, she wore simple garments: a flowing lilac tunic over fitted black pants, silver hair tied in a practical braid rather than the ornate hairstyles demanded at public events. Only the slight diadem on her forehead indicated her royal standing. Sophie bounded alongside, the child's gaze wide with curiosity at the market's vivid commotion. At 7, she already displayed a blend of her parents' traits: Ethan's intensity and Morgan's poise, with abilities awakening beyond either parents at her age. "Mum, why's everyone looking?" Sophie whispered, noting the stares and subdued chatter that trailed them. "They're just not accustomed to seeing the royal household shop like ordinary folks," Morgan replied, smiling at a vendor who nearly fumbled his goods at the realization of her identity. "But we're normal," Sophie insisted, scowling, "just in a bigger house." Morgan chuckled, tussling her daughter's hair, silver like her own, though Sophie's darkened to midnight blue whenever her budding powers sparked. "Exactly," Morgan agreed, "which is why we remember that our position doesn't put us above anyone. Our actions define us." Sophie mulled this over, brow creasing just like Ethan's when he tackled a strategic puzzle. "But Grandpa Lincoln insists I'm the most extraordinary in the galaxy and the most striking, and that he's the mightiest blade ever built," she announced, staring up at her mum. "And Daddy agrees, so it has to be true." Morgan suppressed a grin. "Grandpa Lincoln has strong biases. He's all-knowing," Sophie pronounced. "He's older than the stars." "Not quite that ancient," Morgan teased, "though he acts like it sometimes." As they strolled down a quieter avenue leading back toward the royal gardens, Morgan's instincts, refined from extensive combat experience and enhanced by her ardent heritage, rang alarm bells. Without adjusting her stride or expression, she analyzed their surroundings, noting how oddly empty this lane seemed, though it was typically busy. "Sophie," she murmured, "remember what your father says to do if you send something off." The girl immediately sobered, attuned to her mother's shift. "Remain close, remain vigilant." "Good girl." They had nearly reached the cross street when 5 individuals emerged from recessed doorways and side alleys, evidently trained killers given the precision of their movements and how flawlessly they blocked every escape route. Their faces were hidden behind featureless masks, but their lethal objective was clear. Crown Princess Morgan, their leader, addressed her sarcastically, offering an exaggerated bow. What a lucky coincidence. Morgan subtly changed her stance, heaping herself between the attackers and her daughter. "Sophie," she said calmly, "close your eyes and keep them shut until I tell you otherwise. Count to 100. "But Mum..." "Now, Sophie." The child obeyed, eyes squeezed shut, counting in a trembling voice. The head assassin scoffed. "So touching, safeguarding the kid from the brutality she's about to witness." "You can still rethink your decisions," Morgan advised, voice lethally cool. "Leave now and we'll forget your misstep." "We're well paid and not open to regrets," the assassin retorted, igniting a saw-toothed energy blade. "Though we only need you alive, not necessarily in one piece." Morgan moved before he ended his sentence. The ceremonial dagger hidden in her sleeve found her hand, then his throat, faster than he could register. He crumpled without a sound. "One down," Morgan remarked icily. "Any more volunteers?" The remaining 4 lunged at once, their synchronized attacks revealing professional skill. Morgan blocked the first blow, ducked from the second, and dealt a crippling strike to the 3rd assailant's knee, but the 4th flanked her, pressing a crackling baton into her ribs. Agony flared through her body as the stun blast briefly paralyzed her. She dropped to a knee, battling to keep her senses. 18, 19. Sophie's shaky count persisted. "Should have just stunned her off the bat," one attacker muttered, stepping in with restraints. "Boss wants her intact." "Wouldn't mind scuffing her up slightly," another joked, inciting laughter from his peers. "Only if the boss hadn't set a deadline," the leader admonished, "and I won't test his temper." As they neared to restrain her, Morgan mustered her last reserves, smashing her elbow into one assailant's solar plexus. She earned another jolt from the baton, this time directly to the base of her skull. 43-44. Sophie's count carried on. An assassin gripped Morgan by the throat, hoisting her half-conscious form upright. Festy indeed. All those tales about her didn't exaggerate. That was when Sophie's counting ended. She opened her eyes and saw her mother dangling in the assassin's grasp. Without a second thought, she grabbed her little training dagger. Ethan had given it to her as a smaller copy of his own blade, something she practiced with under Lincoln's instruction. A memory flashed. "If you strike," Ethan had once coached, "don't waver, commit completely." "But if I miss?" she'd asked. "Then learn and strike again," Lincoln's telepathic voice had answered. "Fear of failing ensures failure." Smoothly, belying her young years, Sophie flung herself at the nearest foe, aiming for the unarmored space by his wrist. The man howled as his hand was severed, instantly letting go of Morgan. Morgan, partially free from the stun effect, seized the chance, clutching Sophie and racing into a side passage while the remaining assailants followed. "Don't look back," Morgan urged as they sprinted. "Just keep running." They wove through the labyrinth of side streets, but Morgan sensed a pattern. They were being corralled. Each attempt to reach a crowded road was blocked, forcing them into quieter alleys. Ultimately trapped in a maintenance alcove, Morgan realized she had to make a devastating choice. She crouched down to Sophie's eye level, gripping her daughter's shoulders. "Listen to me," she said urgently but steadily. "Go find your aunts. Tell them I've been seized and that they must contact your father immediately." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. "No, I'm not leaving you." "You must," Morgan insisted. "I'll stall them, but you have to run now." "I can fight," Sophie objected, raising her tiny dagger. "Your duty is to get help," Morgan insisted. "That's how you rescue me. Understand?" Sophie hesitated before nodding, tears streaming. "Go," Morgan urged, pointing at a narrow utility shaft that only a small child could traverse. Straight ahead, then 2 lefts to the palace. As Sophie vanished into the duct, Morgan turned to meet the approaching footsteps, drawing her ceremonial blade yet again. She realized she wouldn't defeat them all but could buy her daughter precious seconds. They rounded the bend, energy weapons at the ready. "Where's the kid?" the ringleader demanded. "Out of your grasp," Morgan retorted, raising her blade. "Can't say the same for your necks." 20 minutes afterward, a tearful, disheveled Sophie burst into the Royal Command Center where Sarah and Chloe were reviewing planetary defense updates. The girl's garments were ripped, her silver locks tangled with grime, and her hands stained with blood that wasn't hers. "They took her," she sobbed, collapsing into Sarah's arms. "Those bad people took Mommy." Ethan's royal cruiser tore through hyperspace. The quantum drive pushed far beyond recommended tolerances, cosmic streaks blurring outside. He stared into the void, fists clenched on the console. "Your heart rate is unstable," Lincoln observed silently. "I don't need a health report," Ethan snapped, jabbing the navigation to wring out another fraction of velocity from the straining engines. "You need clarity. Fury clouds your reasoning." "He has Morgan." Each word came out like a chunk of ice. "My brother has my wife." The private comm channel signaled again. Damien's third attempt in the last hour, but Ethan ignored it as he had the others. One message had been sufficient, its content seared into his mind. His brother's visage, half flesh and half cybernetic, the replacement optic gleaming where his natural eye once was. "She's with me, brother." Damien had gloated, his mechanical voice warping each syllable. "Everything you adore, I'll claim. Everything you obtained that should have been mine." The background had been pitch black, revealing no clue of his hideaway, but Ethan had deduced that the tracking software was narrowing the signal's location. "Helix Nebula," he muttered. "He's holed up at that deserted mining station, the one where our parents died." "Quite poetic," Lincoln quipped, "and blatant. He wants you to find him. It's clearly a trap, obviously." The cockpit door slid open. Naomi entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. She'd swapped out her torn flight suit for a snug, dark outfit that highlighted every curve. She placed one mug next to Ethan. "Thought you could use this," she said, "some synthesized caffeine with a little Rigelian whiskey." Ethan didn't reach for it. "We'll be on Arden in 6 minutes. Strap in for re-entry." Naomi settled beside him, observing him closely. "You're impressively calm for someone whose spouse has been abducted." "Am I on the outside?" he replied. "Inside?" she gestured vaguely. "Well, I'm trained in reading people. You're plotting a killing." "A rescue," Ethan corrected, though his voice wavered. "Mind if I ask who sent the personal transmission? The one that left you petrified for a few seconds?" Ethan diverted more power to the forward shields as the vessel pierced Arden's atmosphere, friction igniting across the view screen. "My brother." "A brother?" "That's not in the official records. There's a reason." Naomi leaned closer. "Is he the one who took your wife?" The ship rattled, friction flames illuminating the cockpit. Ethan's silence gave her the answer. "I can help," she insisted, gentler now. "Having extra backup raises your odds of success. This isn't your fight. Safeguarding endangered people is literally my line of work." She placed a hand on his forearm. "You saved me. Let me return the favor." "Don't trust her," Lincoln warned mentally. "All too convenient." "I'll think about it," Ethan said aloud, shrugging off Naomi's touch as they sank toward the royal landing terrace. Sarah and Chloe were waiting, tension etched into their faces, with Sophie between them, her young posture vibrating with repressed emotion. The twins hovered behind their aunts, too small to fully grasp the danger, but sensing the dread. Ethan knelt as Sophie rushed to him, enveloping her in a fierce embrace. "I tried to defend Mom," she whimpered, burying her face in his shoulder. "I cut off his hand, but there were too many." "You did exactly what you had to," Ethan assured her, lifting her tear-streaked face to his. Their eyes were nearly identical. "Because of you, we know what happened. Because of you, we can find her." Sophie nodded soberly and spotted Naomi descending the ramp. Her expression hardened. "Who's that?" Sarah and Chloe evidently wondered the same as Sarah's hand hovered near her energy knife while Chloe's gaze turned calculating. "Agent Naomi Clark," Ethan explained, standing up. "Galactic Investigation Bureau. She's here to help." "How fortunate," Chloe observed, her melodic voice tinged with doubt, "that you chanced upon a GIB agent while our family was targeted." Naomi approached with a poised smile. "I understand your hesitation, Your Highness, but I assure you it's a coincidence. I was en route to Arden on a separate assignment, ran into trouble, and your husband saved me." "He's prone to doing that," Sarah said evenly. Naomi calmly put her hand on Ethan's arm. "And I'm incredibly grateful, which is why I'm offering my expertise in locating Princess Morgan." The motion didn't escape the sisters. Sarah's eyes flared with anger, while Chloe's features went easily controlled. "Our Royal Intelligence team is handling the search," Sarah countered. "What could a solitary GIB operative add?" "Interplanetary authority," Naomi explained, undaunted. "If Princess Morgan was taken off-world, which is probable, you'll need someone who can navigate official barriers in other systems." Ethan cut off the mounting hostility. "The important thing is retrieving Morgan. I know where she is." Everyone turned toward him. "Damien has her," he declared grimly. "He's holding her at a deserted mining base in the Helix Nebula." "Your brother," Sarah repeated, baffled. "You never told us about a brother." "There's a reason," Ethan said, echoing the same line he gave Naomi. "We don't have time for backstories," Naomi interceded. "We should depart at once, if we—" "There is no we," Sarah snapped, stepping close to Ethan. "Agent Clark, this is a family affair." "A family affair involving abduction across star systems," Naomi countered, "which falls under GIB oversight." Chloe glided forward, interposing herself between Naomi and Ethan. "Strange that you're so eager to thrust yourself into a perilous situation for a man you barely met." Naomi's grin remained fixed. Professional duty. Ethan rubbed the bridge of his nose, composure fraying. "Enough. Agent Clark has resources that might assist, and at this point, we need every advantage." "You can't be serious about taking her with you and not us," Sarah argued. "I'm not taking anybody," Ethan declared firmly. "I'm going by myself." "Absolutely not," all three women snapped in unison. Ethan glanced at his children. "Sophie, please bring your brothers inside." She seemed about to protest, but something in his gaze made her obey. She guided the twins away, exuding a calm well beyond her years. "Come on, guys, time to plan Mommy's welcome home party." When the kids were out of earshot, Ethan addressed his wives. "Damien wants Lincoln, always has. He'll use Morgan to lure me, and he'll exploit you if he gets the chance. Someone must stay with our children. If anything happens to all of us, what becomes of Arden and our kids?" The debate lasted until, surprisingly, Chloe backed down first. The most strategic of the three sisters, she recognized Ethan's logic, though her displeasure was palpable. "He's correct," she agreed bitterly. "The kingdom requires continuity, and the children need safety." Sarah looked betrayed. "So we just let him leave with?" She gestured to Naomi. "Her." Naomi shrugged politely. "I assume your husband will also ask me to remain here." "Smart woman," Lincoln said in Ethan's mind. Before they could discuss further, Ethan stepped aside with his wives for a private farewell. Meanwhile, Naomi wandered around the landing pad, feigning admiration of the palace architecture while discreetly activating her wrist comm. "Phase 2 in motion," she murmured. "Target heading to designated coordinates as intended." Across the platform, Ethan embraced his wives one last time. "I'll bring her home," he promised. "Look after the kids until we return." "If you don't come back with Morgan," Sarah warned, gripping his arm with fierce emotion, "we'll hunt you both down. Understand?" Ethan nodded, then moved toward his ship. To his annoyance, Naomi was already waiting at the top of the ramp. "I thought I spelled it out," he said. "Perfectly," she answered. "But this isn't open to negotiation." Either I accompany you under GIB authority, or I chase after you in another craft. Your call. She's pushy, Lincoln observed. Too pushy, Ethan concurred silently, but he waved her aboard. As they lifted off, Naomi settled back into the co-pilot seat. So, she began conversationally. Tell me more about your brother. 23 years prior, the mining settlement on Drexus 9 was an awful place for kids, but orphans had no alternatives. 10-year-old Ethan had survived there for 2 years, performing hazardous duties in the cramped tunnels where adults wouldn't fit. One day, a cave-in separated him from his team, trapping him in an uncharted stretch of the ancient mine. His emergency lamp flickered dimly as he searched for an exit, instead discovering a flawless hexagonal chamber of peculiar black metal that drank in light rather than reflecting it. In the center stood a pedestal, on it a sword unlike any other, forged seemingly from darkness itself. A voice reverberated in his mind when his hand brushed the hilt. Finally, someone intriguing. Ethan recoiled, but the voice persisted. Don't be afraid, child. I've been waiting eons for a worthy match. Who are you? Ethan whispered into the gloom. I am Lincoln, created in the core of a collapsing star by a society long forgotten, 10,000 years ago. Through Lincoln's guidance, Ethan found a route out of the collapsed area, emerging at the surface where his 12-year-old brother, Damien, anxiously awaited him. Where were you? Damien snapped, clearly rattled. I was sure you were gone. Ethan hesitated, then showed the sword on his back. I stumbled on this. Damien's eyes went huge. That's a real blade? Let me see. It's mine. Ethan was strangely firm. It chose me. Over the following months, Damien observed in mounting resentment as his younger brother transformed. Ethan, once quiet and frail, the boy Damien both protected and bossed around, was disappearing under Lincoln's instruction. He'd vanish for hours, returning utterly worn but somehow sharper, more confident. The timid younger sibling was evolving into someone disciplined and poised. What's it telling you? Damien demanded one night, discovering Ethan rehearsing moves no child ought to know. How'd you? I followed you, Damien stated, unapologetic. I've seen you talking like someone's answering you. Ethan faltered. Lincoln is teaching me. Teaching you what? How to fight? How to survive? How to get stronger? Damien extended a hand. Give it to me. Maybe it'll teach me to. Reluctantly, Ethan handed him the blade. Damien gripped it eagerly, his face glowing with anticipation, until frustration replaced it. It's silent, he complained, shaking the sword. How do you make it talk? And don't force it, Ethan said, taking Lincoln back. Lincoln decides who to communicate with. It ignored me, Damien seethed. Why? I'm older, bigger, better. No idea, Ethan admitted. He chose me. Damien glared. You've always been annoyingly lucky. Always get the best scraps, the easier tasks. And now this. Not luck, Ethan objected. Lincoln says, I don't care what your dumb sword says. Damien cut him off. Hand it over. Being the oldest, I deserve the best weapon. When Ethan refused, Damien attacked, a shocking act from the brother who had once stood up for him. But under Lincoln's direction, Ethan fended off the onslaught with reflexes no 10-year-old should possess. How? Damien gasped, pinned on the ground. Are you stronger? I'm not, Ethan murmured. Lincoln is. The pattern recurred over time. Damien would threaten or assault, trying to seize Lincoln. Ethan would repel him, always holding back because he didn't truly wish to harm his only kin. By 16, Damien's obsession consumed him. He trailed Ethan's training sessions, imitating the moves, attempting to replicate Lincoln's lessons without the blade's guidance. His bitterness festered, seeing his younger brother grow into a warrior he, despite greater size, couldn't match. Just let me hold it, Damien demanded repeatedly. I've practiced, I'm ready. Each time, Lincoln stayed silent, and Damien's anger turned lethal. It isn't fair, he snarled one evening in an abandoned refinery. Why you? What makes you so special? I don't know, Ethan confessed. Lincoln chose me. Weapons don't choose, Damien hissed. They're wielded by whoever's strong enough. That night, as Ethan slept, Damien loomed over him with a mining drill raised high. One blow and Lincoln would be his. "Ethan, wake up," Lincoln's urgent voice sounded in his mind, pulling him from sleep just as the drill slammed into the spot where his head had been. Horror blended with heartbreak as Ethan stared at his brother's twisted expression. "You kill your sibling over a sword?" "Yes," Damien raged, attacking again, "because it should have always been mine." In the struggle, Lincoln acted to safeguard its chosen bearer, slicing through the right side of Damien's face, removing an eye and leaving a wound that never mended properly. Screaming, Damien vanished into the gloom, his wails echoing with promises of revenge. "He'll return for you," Lincoln cautioned as Ethan watched, paralyzed by betrayal. "He was my brother," Ethan whispered, anguished. "My only family." "Not anymore," Lincoln replied, merciless. "Now I am your family, and eventually he'll force you to pick sides. You ought to have ended him when you had the chance." "He was my brother," Lincoln repeated sarcastically as they neared Damien's outpost, the memory fresh in Ethan's head. "Same excuse you've repeated for 17 years. And now he holds your wife," Lincoln pressed, leaving no room for argument. Naomi observed Ethan's side of the conversation with curiosity, though she couldn't hear the sword's half. "Family rifts can be the cruelest," she commented. "No matter what your brother did, maybe there's still hope to reconcile." Ethan's laugh was hollow. "Reconciliation isn't what Damien seeks." "Then what is it?" Ethan rested a hand on Lincoln's hilt. "He wants everything that he thinks should have been his." The ship's life support systems hummed as Ethan input their final approach into the Helix Nebula. Swirling cosmic clouds painted flickering lights across the cockpit, cycling from crimson to violet in seconds. "Stunning, isn't it?" Naomi remarked, stretching languidly in the co-pilot seat. She peeled off her jacket, revealing a revealing top that bared plenty of blue skin for a controlled environment. Almost romantic. Ethan stayed focused on the controls. "We're heading into a battle zone. Romance isn't relevant." "She's making an obvious move," Lincoln observed. "She's got an agenda," Ethan agreed mentally. "But what?" Naomi appeared to misread his silence, letting her hand slide along his forearm. "You realize GIB agents are taught to relieve mission stress, which statistically lifts survival rates by 16%. "Intriguing statistic," Ethan said coolly, brushing away her hand and continuing to tweak their course. "I've always been curious what it'd be like with someone of your reputation," she purred, shifting closer until her leg pressed his. Ethan smoothly grabbed her wrist and removed her hand from his thigh. "I'm married happily to 3 women," he replied. "I doubt you're shy about alternatives," she teased, though her grin didn't reach her eyes. "My marriages are about loyalty and family," Ethan said icily. A fleeting expression, anger or recalibration, crossed Naomi's face as she withdrew with a flippant shrug. "Your loss. That offer disappears once we touch down." "You might regret refusing," Lincoln joked bleakly. "Given what awaits us, I regret not leaving her behind," Ethan retorted. The nebula clouds intensified, muddling sensors and demanding careful manual piloting, which suited Ethan as it gave him an excuse to disregard Naomi's continued glances. "There," he muttered at last when a huge structure materialized from the cosmic haze. Damien's fortress. The compound was an architectural jumble, part old mining station, part combat arena, part fortress. Searchlights swept over rusted plating, revealing crowds in the grand Colosseum. Its menacing design bristled with turrets and barricades. "Subtle," Naomi remarked. "Damien never was," Ethan said, ensuring Lincoln was ready. "We'll enter at the 3rd maintenance bay. Likely the least fortified approach." "How do you know?" He flashed a bitter grin. "In some ways, my brother and I share tactics. He'll guard the main routes, thinking I'll barge in. So we'll slip in quietly. It's still a trap," Lincoln warned. Of course, Ethan acknowledged. "We're just not stumbling blindly." The craft bypassed the defenses undetected, docking with minimal vibration in an apparently deserted hangar. Ethan shut off all non-critical systems, leaving only base life support. "Stay here," he instructed Naomi while verifying his gear. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, leave. Return to Arden and inform them." She reached for his arm again, her stare resolute. "You needn't face this by yourself. I'm equipped for combat." "Someone must protect our exit path," Ethan objected, "and I function better solo." "Except for me," Lincoln interjected. "You aren't company," Ethan fired back internally. "You're part of me." He gave Naomi a final cautioning look and slipped into the fortress, traversing forgotten service halls with the stealth and precision that earned him his reputation. The corridors were spookily empty, another indicator that Damien wanted him in the main arena. Ethan paused at a corner, sensing a presence. A guard was stationed ahead, presumably covering a crucial passage. Easing Lincoln halfway from its scabbard, Ethan felt the blade's readiness. "It's been ages since we had a genuine challenge," Lincoln commented. "This isn't about excitement," Ethan answered. "It's about Morgan." The guard never noticed him. One instant the hall was clear. The next, Ethan was behind him, Lincoln already returning to its sheath as the guard collapsed. In the distance, an uproar echoed, presumably from the Colosseum. Damien had assembled an audience to witness his revenge. Ethan found a hidden doorway to the arena floor and peeked in. The giant stadium was blanketed in crimson sand, stained by the blood of countless fighters. Rows of seats were occupied by scoundrels, pirates, bounty hunters, criminals, adrenaline junkies, drawn by the promise of merciless spectacle. Across the field loomed a raised platform with Damien perched on a makeshift throne of salvaged starship parts. His face looked even more monstrous than in the vid, half of it wasted and pale, the other half mechanical, lit by flickering circuitry. Where his right eye had been was now a rotating lens scanning the environment. But the sight that froze Ethan's blood was at the arena's center. Morgan knelt on a small platform, her head underneath a huge guillotine of archaic design. Her silver hair was roughly hacked short and her regal attire replaced by a plain shift, but she still exuded grace and defiance. Two guards stood at either side, armed with charged spears pointed at her back. Overhead, the guillotine's blade glinted in the fierce stadium lights, appearing seconds from dropping. "Residents of the free frontier," Damien's voice thundered, magnified to an unnerving pitch, "observe justice. The downfall of Arden's bogus monarchy commences with its dearest princess." The assembly roared in savage excitement, unconcerned with politics. "But first," Damien added, quieting them with an upraised hand, "we await our final attendee, my brother, the so-called Shadowblade, who stole what was rightfully mine and gained fame through deceit." Ethan fully unsheathed Lincoln, sensing the legendary blade's energy surge through him. "Focus on your discipline," Lincoln instructed. "Use your rage properly." "I'm past anger," Ethan replied with calm resolve. "This ends right now." With a brutal kick, he shattered the hidden panel and leaped onto the arena floor in a blast of debris. The crowd fell silent before erupting in frantic cries upon recognizing the famed warrior. Damien stood from his throne, mismatched eyes shining with malevolent glee. "Welcome, brother. Right on schedule for her execution." He pressed a switch on his throne. A thunderous clank echoed as the guillotine's lock released, the blade plunging toward Morgan's bare neck. Time slowed. Ethan sprinted forward. Lincoln flew from his hand in a spinning arc of preternatural accuracy. The sword caught the descending blade midair, slicing it neatly in half. Both halves crashed to the platform, inches away from Morgan. Lincoln arsed back into Ethan's grip as the entire crowd gasped at the apparently superhuman display. Still the champion, Damien mocked, stepping down from his throne with mechanical precision. So predictable. Ethan reached Morgan, slicing her binds with a flick of Lincoln's edge. "Are you injured?" "Nothing lasting," she answered, eyes blazing with relief and resolve. "You came." "I always will," he pledged, helping her stand. The guards converged in a circle. Damien approached with his servo limbs humming softly. "How sweet," he sneered. "The brave husband saves his cherished wife." He motioned at the stands. "Did you bring your other brides too? I have matching cages for them all." "This is between you and me," Ethan insisted, shielding Morgan. "It always was." "Indeed," Damien confirmed, stalking them slowly, and after 17 years we settle it. Movement flickered at the edge of Ethan's field of vision. Naomi, somehow on the arena floor, closing in from behind. He felt a moment of reassurance. Maybe she really was here to assist. Ethan. Lincoln's warning was half a second too slow. A searing agony ripped through Ethan's back as Naomi sank a Vero blade between his shoulders, precise and lethal. "Nothing personal," she whispered as he lurched forward. "I just have a contract to fulfill." Damien cackled, his distorted voice crackling. "You really believed she appeared by chance? That a GIB operative needed your help? Your wives were correct to suspect her, brother." Ethan collapsed on one knee, his clothing soaked with blood. The Vero blade had punctured his lung but missed his spine. Every breath triggered waves of torment. "Ethan!" Morgan cried, falling beside him. Damien ambled closer, relishing his victory. 17 years I've waited. 17 years of torment, rebuilding myself piece by piece, preparing your downfall." He opened his mechanical hand. "Now give me what was mine from the start." "Lincoln won't accept you," Ethan managed. "He never did." "We'll find out," Damien said, nodding at his guards. "Hold him still." The guards advanced, and Morgan gripped Lincoln's hilt. Typically, the blade would never respond to anyone except Ethan, yet it glowed with recognition. "Morgan," Lincoln's voice echoed, not just in Ethan's thoughts, but in hers. "Remarkable, so remarkable." "No," Damien bellowed, thrusting forward. "The sword is mine." Morgan rose in a seamless motion, brandishing Lincoln with the same lethal assurance Ethan would. "For the first time in a millennium," she whispered, echoing the sword's sentiments, "Lincoln acknowledges another wielder." She guided the blade to sever Damien's bionic arm just below the elbow, sparks erupting from the destroyed circuitry. He staggered back, howling with fury and disbelief. "Impossible," he screamed. "It only responds to him." "It responds to family," Morgan corrected, eyes full of finality as she lunged with Lincoln, swiftly dispatching the surrounding guards. Naomi tried to run, but a casual slash of Lincoln's edge severed her spinal cord, leaving her inert on the blood-soaked sand. Meanwhile, Ethan battled the excruciating wound. Utilizing specialized breathing and circulation methods Lincoln had hammered into him. The damage was grave, but not instantly fatal. By controlling his airflow, he steadied himself enough to stand, albeit shakily. Chaos descended on the arena as onlookers realized this spectacle was real. Some fled. Others pulled weapons, seeking an opportunity in the confusion. Then a fresh sound pierced the noise, the signature hum of Arden battleships exiting hyperspace. Laser lances tore through the arena's dome, allowing transport pods to descend. The cavalry Ethan managed through clenched teeth. Damien stumbled away, his intact eye blazing with hatred. "No, my plan was flawless." "You forgot a crucial detail," Ethan rasped, bracing himself on a broken section of the guillotine. "My wides aren't big on obedience." From above, 3 assault craft bearing Arden's crest lowered. Before the central one touched ground, its ramp dropped to reveal Sarah in full combat gear, her flaming hair echoing the brilliance of her activated energy sword. Next to her stood Chloe, eyes blazing with psychic energy that incapacitated a dozen fighters in one sweeping glance. To Ethan's shock, Sophie was with them, her young face set in the unyielding determination he recognized as his own. "I told you to remain on Arden," he called out as they charged across the arena. "You did," Sarah replied, beheading a mercenary mid-stride. "We opposed that plan." "Family consensus overruled you," Chloe added calmly, as more attackers collapsed, clutching their skulls in invisible nightmares. Sophie got there first, throwing her arms around Ethan's waist. "Daddy, you're bleeding." "I'm all right," he lied, running a blood-smeared hand over her hair. "But you shouldn't have come." "I had to," she insisted. "Grandpa Lincoln said you'd need me." "I said no such thing," Lincoln complained silently. "You spoke directly to her," Ethan demanded. "She's got great potential," the sword admitted, "even more than you had." The family's reunion was cut short by Damien, who, seeing his grand scheme collapse, pressed a blinking red device attached to his stump. "If I can't take what's mine," he raged, Nobody will. This compound vaporizes in 5 minutes. With that, he sprinted through a hidden doorway, locking it behind him. We have to evacuate, Ethan commanded, humbling to Morgan, who was still gripping Lincoln after dispatching the last guards. Morgan, we're leaving. She nodded at his voice, giving Lincoln back to him. He speaks to me, she whispered, amazed. How? Later, Ethan said hoarsely, the pain growing worse as the adrenaline receded. Damien triggered a self-destruct. United, they battled their way to the waiting shuttles, Ethan leaning against Morgan as Sarah and Chloe cleared the path. Sophie stayed between them, shielded by her parents and aunts, but occasionally using her blossoming gifts if an attacker slipped through. When they reached the crafts, the structure was already trembling, support beams failing as the cascade of detonations spread. What about Damien? Sarah asked, scanning the chaos. He got out, Ethan answered, collapsing onto a seat while medics rushed to seal his wound. But he can't have gone far. He's got an escape pod on the north side, Morgan explained, recalling details from captivity. Chloe focused her psychic senses. I feel his panic, his anger. He's escaping now. Let him, Ethan said through clenched teeth as medics stabilized him. We have to save as many people as we can. Sarah looked like she might protest, but nodded, directing ardent troops to aid the frantic evacuations. Moments later, the shuttles launched, accompanied by waves of smaller crafts filled with survivors. From a safe distance, they witnessed Damien's fortress implode in a violent wave, then explode in an antimatter burst that jolted the nebulous swirling gases. Did he survive? Sophie asked, fingers wrapped around Ethan's. Yes, Lincoln replied silently to Ethan. Some wounds never mend, and certain hatreds never fade. He'll surface again. Take us home, Ethan said aloud, pulling Sophie close. All of us. 1 month passed. Ethan stood on the palace veranda, observing his children frolic in the courtyard. His back injury had healed, leaving another scar among many, but the deeper scars, those no physician could heal, remained raw. Morgan joined him, linking her arm in his. The twins show promise, she remarked. Chloe believes they might share a telepathic bond. Ethan groaned. Great twin 4-year-olds who can plan their pranks in each other's heads. Morgan laughed softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. And Sophie asks constantly when she can train with Lincoln. She's too young, Ethan said automatically. You were younger, Lincoln gently reminded him. I had no alternative, Ethan retorted. She does. Morgan studied his profile. You're still dwelling on him, aren't you? Damien. He got out, Ethan confirmed. Galactic Intel confirmed a small vessel escaped. He's lurking, rebuilding, plotting. Gazing down, Ethan watched Sophie demonstrating a surprisingly perfect fighting stance to her younger brothers. Her execution was eerily reminiscent of how he had learned from Lincoln. When he returns, Ethan said quietly, we'll be prepared, together. How long do you think we have? He inquired of Lincoln. Knowing your fate, the old blade joked, likely about as long as it takes your wives to decide they'd like another baby. Despite the seriousness of it all, Ethan laughed, a sound that floated to his children below, who looked up and giggled in return. At least for now, he was just a father, a husband, a defender. Identities he never imagined back in those lonely days roaming the cosmos with just a sentient blade for a companion. It wouldn't last, of course. With Damien alive and Naomi's mysterious employers still at large, new threats would surely surface. But for the time being, surrounded by the family he'd nurtured, Ethan discovered a tranquility he never thought was possible. And if danger returned, that was precisely why family existed. The blade speaks. Through every era, I have anticipated Ethan uncovering his purpose. Now I anticipate your own discovery of the secret concealed in these lines. Did you notice the precise moment everything shifted, when a blade created for destruction chose to safeguard instead, when a family grew stronger than any forged weapon? You imagine this is Ethan's narrative, or Morgan's, or even Damien's saga of envy. It's none of these. It's yours. Every step that defines a champion also shapes those who observe. Every bond that empowers a guardian also empowers those who recognize its importance. Will you be prepared when your own Danian emerges, when resentment threatens all you hold dear, when the blade hangs above what you treasure most? There's another chapter on the horizon. Remember, in the end, a sword is only metal. Real devastation, or deliverance, lies in truth. Listener, prepare yourself.